So, my name is Diane Silverman, and I'm Executive Director of Quorum Initiative. And I am very excited to have two of our members presenting today, Somi Kim and Amy Brown. The topic is Through the Looking Glass, Exploring Microsteps After a Job Loss. And just to give you a quick introduction to both Sami and Amy. Sami is a design strategist who aligns business goals and human values. Most recently, she was Senior Director of Healthcare and Enterprise Solutions at Johnson & Johnson. She's the mother of a teenager and is also an Aspen Institute First Movers Fellow. Amy Mertz Brown is Chief Compliance and Privacy Officer at BECU. She has 30 years of experience as a leader, warrior, and compliance professional in both the public and the private sectors. Amy has her finger in many pots, including she's very active with the 50/50 Women on Boards, which is a global nonprofit with a mission to accelerate gender balance and diversity on corporate boards. So when Amy posts things on LinkedIn about the work she's doing, I'm very excited to see it. So anyway, without further ado, thank you both, and I'm going to hand this over to Amy and Sami.
Great. Well, I'd like to just give you a little bit more background on Sami. She's, as Diane mentioned, was at Johnson & Johnson's, and now she's between roles, I guess, or kind of still in her design phase for her life, which we'll be talking about today. And she's currently prototyping her post-corporate design practice through board roles and other collaborations. She continues to contribute to inclusive and accessible experiences that prioritize ethical considerations and community engagement. She has a lifelong love of language and stories, especially dynamic vernacular cross-pollination between cultures, which fuels her advocacy for purposeful technology integration and inclusive design. And it's really interesting that the two of us have been brought together because Sami is in a very different world than I am, but we had a similar experience in the last few months, and so we found a lot of common ground in discussing the topic. So I think you've got enough of an introduction to me. Sami's really the guest speaker today. So Sami, we had talked a little bit about the issue of identity after a transition. And I know you've given a lot of thought to the concept of microsteps and as it applies to transitions in jobs. You can talk a little bit more about microsteps, or
Sure.
if you'd like to describe a little bit what that is.
So microsteps are really those small achievable steps that can help basically get to larger goals, and it's something that can help with your own motivation because it's not trying to solve everything all at once. And I also wanted to mention what I think is a great book that I have not read yet, because I do have a very tall pile on my bedside table. But this was actually a book pointed out by another Quorum Initiative member, Willow Darcy, and it's by Herminia Ibarra. And she wrote a book called Working Identity: Unconventional Strategies for Reinventing Your Career. And the synopsis that I've read of this book sounds exactly like what I've been going through and what I'm hoping to do. She talks about nonlinear exploration, small wins, which is the microsteps, connection being an integral part of keeping the momentum, and then also reframing one's narrative. And for me, it really did feel like a huge loss initially when my organization was dissolved, because I had spent the last 20 years in 2 different corporate leadership roles. And prior to that, I had had my own business for 13 years. So I had never not worked. And ever since high school, I had always worked. And I'm the daughter of immigrants. And so there's very much this sense that we have to give in a lot of different ways, and we have to support our family and our friends. And so suddenly to lose that affiliation, which can be a powerful affiliation, especially when a company has a very tangible and meaningful purpose, such as Johnson & Johnson's, which is focused on health for humanity. And so to lose that suddenly really felt like the rug had been pulled out. And I'm very fortunate that I had many great mentors and friends who cautioned me not to react out of fear and not to simply grab the first thing that might come along, but to take the time to be mindful and deliberate about understanding what might be the best path forward. And maybe it's multiple paths, because what I realized early on is that the idea of being a W-2 employee might not be in my future. It may not be appropriate anymore. We have a lot of friends and colleagues who are also experimenting with fractional roles. So how might we look at a portfolio of our life experiences inclusive of work in a way that actually allows us to have more control? And so that was something that took me probably a year to really feel okay with the fact that I was no longer a card-carrying employee that could go to conferences and speak on behalf of a very meaningful company. And so just to encourage everybody who's in transition, I really do believe that there's more to trying to fill the void and replicate what one might have had, because it was fantastic. I got so much out of my 15 years. I met amazing people. I was able to contribute to so many different types of programs. But I have also learned a lot of things that have transferability into new spaces that might be of more interest to me now. And so I'm still exploring, and I feel very grateful and fortunate that I had severance last year, and I'm just being very mindful of what it is that I want to take on, as I have also family obligations, which have been coming to a head with an elderly mother with dementia being cared for mostly by my two sisters. And so I'm able to help more in that case. And then I have a teenage son who is collateral damage from the pandemic, as many young people and many of us have been. So helping him figure out what needs to happen and how we don't all have to jump on the bandwagon of the crazy college preparation, college application process. So I'm fortunate to have more time and more flexibility now to think differently about what the work week means. It doesn't have to be 9 to 5, 5 days a week. It's whatever makes sense in the moment where you have time. So as far as identity goes, I'm feeling much more comfortable to just own the fact that I am exploring and I'm collaborating with different people. I'm doing some UX feedback for a startup as part of a community. And I have been invited to join a nonprofit advisory board, and we're waiting for the kickoff, and that's the Vaccine Equity Education Coalition. So an area that is near and dear to me is looking at public programs, especially for communities that are at risk because they haven't had access to information or services. So a lot of different opportunities do crop up as forming identity.
Right. And so I think it's kind of interesting to when we were comparing notes, because I think I also was laid off from a company, and it was a downsizing event at the company, and it was kind of unexpected, and so but what I'm wondering, and maybe some other people can think about this too, is that work identity that you have, that you talked about, Somi, that, I'm used to having my day filled, I'm used to having benefits and, things like being able to go to conferences and whatnot. Those are so many things that wrap up in the work identity, right? Obviously, what the work you do too. But I'm wondering if it doesn't matter whether the transition is unexpected foreseen, intentional. I think people would still have that loss of identity kind of almost regardless, unless they went right into something else that they had already planned. I think it's something even like retirement. I think those transitions from one job to another, or one role to another, I think can be really difficult for people to grapple with.
I agree. And especially if one has the good fortune to work for an organization that has a lot of aspirations to do good, then suddenly one feels, oh, but I was really intertwined with that purpose. I believed in health for humanity. I was contributing. And so to remember that actually there are many different ways to contribute, and one doesn't have to have the title to be a contributor. So there's, as we know, there's so many different types of leadership as well. And I continue to be a mentor to others and to connect to people who I really can learn from as well. And so there's so much bi-directional connection that I think is an important part of just establishing that we are still relevant, even if we don't have a business card or a badge or whatever the case may be.
Right. So I hear you talking about how the identity that you have, the professional identity you have, is kind of goes beyond a company, and you've really been thinking about what type of work purpose or identity do I want to have, or have I always had, and then how can I apply it in the future, right? So like, what are some ways that you've been thinking about structuring your work life in the future? You mentioned some board opportunities and some other, maybe temporary collaborations, but what is your kind of big picture looking like these days?
Well, I've been very interested in some emerging areas, and I had a conversation actually with a former colleague, and I see that there's another friend who has joined this session. Hi, Mary. And just had a great conversation about urban or environmental humanities. So really looking at an emerging field that's about the intersection of the humanities, urban planning, and design. And I think the practice of design can happen at a very macro level. It can be looking at systems, and it can also be very tangible down to very discrete touch points. And so I'm very interested to see how there are a lot of adjacencies that, when coming together with a design perspective, can help to enhance engagement at the community level and to help to tell narratives that perhaps have not been told. So I don't know what this means exactly, but I'm just so inspired to find that there's always something emerging. So we don't have to feel that our skills are finite and that they're only skills that fit onto the number limited by LinkedIn or the job descriptions. And I have applied to jobs, and it is a somewhat soul-bending experience to go through a process and realize that there's just no backstory. And if you don't have an in to someone within a company, it's so easy to second guess oneself when one is immediately sent an email that says thanks but no thanks, because there could be already an incumbent. The role itself might not be what it appears to be. As we know, words mean so many different things. And so it's been an exercise in helping to tease out, well, what do words mean, and what words do I need to be associated with? And how might I get better at telling my story? Because having been working for so long, I find that it's confusing to many people when I talk about things I've done, because there's so many different things. So how can I focus? And I think that's something I still need to do better. And Amy, I don't know if you had to think about focus when you were also
Totally. I mean, I remember, I didn't call it a design process because that's not the language that I would be using in my background and training, but it definitely was, okay, I was doing this one thing, but now, I have a lot of different skills, and trying to think about those skills and where can I fit myself into these slots that somebody else defined. And then I'm like, oh, sure, I could do that, and I could do this, and I could do that. But as I started, going through the process that you described about applying for jobs. It's like that, trying to fit me into a slot wasn't working, like both for myself or probably for the people the slot I was trying to fit into. And I found a much more fruitful help in connecting with people who were in those types of jobs already, for me to really understand what kinds of skills they're really looking for, even though it may not specifically say that in the job description. And it allowed me to kind of better identify what value did I bring, as well as what jobs out there probably were not going to be a good fit for my value. And I started thinking of it more of like, what value do I bring, as opposed to what is the job and how do I fit into the slot. And once I made that shift, it became much easier. And I think, you've been talking about that too, about reconnecting with people as part of your process of discovery, I guess you could call it. And so how have you used that, reconnecting with others? And, how has it felt for you as well as for the other people that you're connecting with?
It's been exciting to reconnect with people. And by and large, I'd say that most people are extremely generous, because it's really, again, bi-directional. You connect, you talk, and it's not that I'm looking for them to find something for me. I'm trying to gain insight and perhaps to think of things differently that they may come up with, because when they're listening to me, it prompts them to consider a particularly different type of space. And so I have been really looking broadly. So I've met with a professor who is looking at decolonized narratives in the estuarial region that is New York, New Jersey. I've met with an epidemiologist, another former colleague, who really always felt that the design process was very much akin to anything that had to be patient-centered. So looking at real-world experiences, real-world data deserts. Are there places where there's a need that I could think of retelling my story? And maybe it's going to a care delivery organization, as opposed to a company that is creating solutions and products for health. So again, it's just shifting that perspective. And that's the looking glass that I alluded to, is really, you're going into this new space and things will look different. And sometimes if you just flip it, you will see that there's an aspect of a type of work or a category of work that might appeal if you define it differently. And it may not be a full-time job. It may be project work, because there are a lot of interesting things, especially when community engagement is a part of it, that rely on grants. And so whether it's academic organizations or other types of firms that are trying to make change in the world, grants are a lot of how that gets done. And so getting into projects can be a way of cutting one's teeth, especially if it's a new space. So finding where there's a need for the skills that one has that can contribute, and that can be a way to gain valuable experience, as well as get out there and actually do things.
Right. And I hear you saying that, that you might not have heard about those things or even thought that your experiences would be relevant until you talk to the people that are in there. And then you start to see those synergies and defining yourself differently than just, I did this task and this project at this company, and really more holistically, what do I really have to offer? Where is my value? I mean, I came up with, after many months of talking to a bunch of people, I started to hone in on my own value, what my key kind of value propositions were. And they really didn't have much to do with, I was a such and so attorney at such and so place. It was really, a much more holistic way to describe what I bring, the value I bring. And so that, I think is a way of kind of using the connections and reconnections with people to kind of help you come up with that. And then what about, fear of the unknown, fear of uncertainty? This is something that I think is really pretty basic to the job transition or career
Yeah.
or any kind of major transition. What's next? I've lost my mooring and my grounding that I had for, X amount of time. How are you, opening yourself up to new ways of thinking and being?
Fear is a really big one, Amy. And
Yeah.
I remember actually attending the How Forum in 2022, one day after we had received the news of the dissolution of our organization. And it was like a balm for my soul. It was amazing to go and to hear all these amazing women speak about very relevant topics. And there was one woman, Katrina Lempensky, who spoke about naming one's values. And I really took that to heart because she said that you have to make sure that your values are truth-based, not fear-based. And the fears
Yeah.
are those voices in our head telling us that we have to do it this way, we should do it, we need to, we ought to, all of those things that we tell ourselves. And I know that everybody is in a very different situation. I was so lucky because I was able to join the retiree insurance from Johnson & Johnson because of my length of service and my age. I was able to take some things with me that made that transition actually helpful. I still have to figure out
Hmm.
what's next though, because it's expensive. It's cheaper than Cobra, but it's expensive. And that's another thing what you don't realize until you leave your company and your health plan. So I'm in the same plan, and that just made everything a little bit better because
Yeah.
unfortunately in the US, we often see people staying in jobs they don't like because they want to have that insurance coverage. And it's terrible to
Sure.
feel trapped by that.
Right. And certainly, I think both you and I have had the privilege of, having a little bit of a comfort zone or a buffer, from some of the sort of more extreme um, repercussions of not having a W-2 job or a full-time something else. And that can really, obviously, if you don't have the luxury of taking the time to do some networking and thinking, that can be harder. So I want to acknowledge that people make all kinds of decisions based on, many, many factors. So what do you think, what does the role of flexibility play in your thinking about the future and sort of in a creative way using
Well,
your design
first of
background?
all, I know that Quorum Initiative is all about action and what are the actions that we commit to. And I have made a commitment this year to focus on my health. And what I realized is that I was basically running hard and doing everything to get the job done, literally, for years. And I never prioritized my health. I got my cardio by literally running to the train or running to the office. And so what I realized though is that it's so important. It's such an important investment of both time and in some cases there's a monetary cost. But I just determined to keep something going there. And so I've been doing an occasional Pilates class. I've been walking a lot. I've been trying to retrain myself to do exercises at home, which is difficult because I have two very inquisitive dogs. And I've been doing a bar class as well. So just realizing that you have to just start somewhere. So starting anywhere is important. And that's, I think John Cage, the musician and composer, had said that is just start anywhere.
Yeah. And that gets to that microstep idea too, of like, that is something that you can do today. You can walk out your front door and walk for 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
And I think, many people that I've talked to who are in a career transition have talked about the importance of reconnecting to yourself physically and mentally. And it kind of goes with the whole process of reinventing what your next step looks like. And if you don't start with that strong foundation of connection to yourself, and the physical, work can really help with that, I think. Going to the gym and whatever it is, but just moving your body in some way, right?
Yes.
And prioritizing your health, as you described. We were joking when we were talking before about how I got a letter from my primary care physician saying, we believe in preventative care for our patients, and if you don't come in for your visit, which is well overdue, we're going to have to terminate our doctor-patient relationship. That's how bad it got of not prioritizing your own health, So
No, it's so
what
true.
else have you done besides, your physical health?
I've been looking at all the structures that we take for granted, and one of them is the 5-day work week and what a weekend is and isn't. And I feel that one can liberate oneself from some of those structures to find the best time to be productive. It might not be between certain hours. And as we all know, who've traveled a lot, there's time zones, there's all sorts of things that can impede connection. But why not structure it in a way that makes sense to the humanity that we share, and try to come up with different ways where it's not about simply sitting there and waiting for the clock to turn to 5 or whenever, but to actually be more mindful and deliberate about those moments when you have to do something and connect. And it might not be during regular business hours, but neither should it be 24/7. So
Right.
taking that time, and I think what I realized also is that I had never really given myself a break. And so it was time for a break. So I needed to prioritize my health and also prioritize people. So if people would contact me spontaneously, then I would just simply jump at that. Why not? Sometimes planning in advance can be a deterrent because we're all really scheduled, whether or not we're working full time. So I think that idea that spontaneity can actually be powerful when you see something that's going on in New York or wherever you live, and you realize that, no, you don't have to read the review and be done with it. You can actually go. And so just figuring out how to mobilize in a lot of different dimensions.
And I think you talked about how your, prioritizing your health was helping. I think what you're describing now also kind of helps, right? It's movement of the mind and movement of the body. You get out of your house and, which is sometimes when you're in a transition, it's very easy to just kind of be in front of your computer all day trying to make something happen, and finding other ways to stretch yourself, like you described with cultural events or what have you. And I know you've also had more time with your son, which is really cool too, to be able to take advantage of that time to attend to more family-oriented things that you might not have had much time for before.
And that is a gift. And I was
Yeah.
fortunate because my husband was always the one who was cooking. But since the pandemic, I've actually started to cook more. And so that's also been interesting to realize that one can do these things, and it isn't just about convenience and rushing through, but to just figure something out that will be a pleasure because it's a creative act as well.
So tell us a little bit more about your ideas about, what your work identity would look like in the next phase in terms of like not a W-2 maybe, or what are some of the things you've been thinking about there?
Well, one thing that I've been very happy to do over the last week is that I've attended 2 year-end reviews. One of them was at the School of Visual Arts Design for Social Innovation graduate program. So I was brought in as a guest critic among maybe 5 others to review student work and give feedback. And the other was at Cooper Union, where one of my dear friends has an open studio class, which is very experimental. And so I was able to participate in the end of year review of the work that the students had done, along with a couple of other visiting critics. And it's so enriching to envision things that the the students are thinking of to understand that they're coming from a very different space than when I was a student, and to realize that I have a lot of things that I can say that are perhaps unexpected or interesting because I have a very different experience. And so that's been a rich space to consider how might I contribute to student work and think about potentially teaching in the future. I still will give that some thought. I've been trying to get a certification in New Jersey, but unfortunately, the process is not smooth. And I just got an email saying that the mailbox of the person I was trying to reach was full and not receiving any more mail, which makes me think that person is no longer there. But
Oh my gosh.
there was a note on my application. I was looking to teach at technical or community colleges because after affirmative action was struck down, I really believed that we needed to connect with students in community colleges and other places in order to ensure that we were looking to expose them to the possibilities of what the future could be and how they could contribute. So I was looking to get certified, but apparently I was found insufficient because I probably spoke too much about the slightly more esoteric and strategic types of deliverables that I had been involved with over my more recent past, and less about the tangible and tactical things, such as graphic design or advertising design. So I was trying to rectify that with the help of one of my colleagues at J&J, who was kindly sending the assessments of my capability. But it's just a kind of a circular process where the system also will kick you out at a certain point because there's apparently an expiration date on your application. So I haven't given up because I do think that that's a place that wouldn't be my full-time endeavor, obviously, but to contribute in spaces where I can actually bring a lot of experience and insight to others who may not have been exposed to
Yeah.
what it's like.
Well, and it sounds like you could also help them with designing the application process for a teaching certification.
That's
Because
true.
that sounds like it needs some work.
Well, civic tech is a big thing
Yeah,
of user experience improvement. And we can see that all the
right.
time whenever we might pay a tax bill or, applying for unemployment insurance in the state of New York. There are all sorts of glitches and potholes that you can encounter.
Right. Well, I think that maybe we could take some questions. Diane, what have you got? Oh, you're on mute.
Oh,
There
there,
you go.
now I'm unmuted. Let's see here. Julie had a question. Somi, do you think your past entrepreneurial experience has helped you to be open to consulting work now, to fractional work?
Absolutely. I was fortunate early in my career to come into design when it was that first .com wave. And so a lot of our clients were entrepreneurs and were trying to launch new services. And so seeing a lot of that effort, it was very interesting, and things have come kind of full circle. And I think there's a lot of startups out there, but there's also a sense of large enterprises trying to compete in those spaces as well. I think that the combination of having been very scrappy and having worked with startups, as well as having been inside the large container ship, those things are complementary to see how one can be an intrapreneur, which is what Aspen First Movers is trying to nurture. How can we have more corporate intrapreneurs that can help to be change makers within companies? But then also how to be nimble and how to look at problem framing, which I think is something that designers can help a lot with, because we can put aside some of our assumptions, perhaps more easily, and to determine what is the right problem to solve for a company that thinks that its value is in one space, but actually it might be in a slightly different space. I think there's a lot of opportunity to contribute, hopefully.
Okay. And another question is actually from me. Have you ever considered writing a book on this? You have the article that you wrote with Julie, but as I think about what you've said today and conversations we've had in the past, um, I think that this is applicable across ages right now because, as you mentioned and as we've talked about before, young people looking at university, whether or not even to attend a university, if that's meaningful and helpful, and if it even makes sense financially. So kind of changing the perspective and how you take the information to look differently at different stages. Young people who've been laid off post-pandemic just because of offshoring jobs in the tech industry and all. I mean, it seems like there are so many applications for this. So I guess, have you considered a book, and what specific advice would you give to young people earlier in their career or about to start the career?
I have not thought about a book specific to my experience with a transition, because I think there actually are a lot of books out there. And to be completely honest, I'm not very good as a reader of business self-help. I find that I love to read. I read a lot, but I tend not to read those types of books. Not that they're not valuable, but I just for some reason have trouble processing. And so I would worry that I would be reinventing the wheel from a lot of really smart people that have pretty much made a career out of helping others in the space. But maybe it's not a book. Maybe there's something else that
Yeah.
could be an interesting contribution or a slightly different perspective. Because when I hear myself, I don't hear that it's anything different from what many of my friends and colleagues would say, because it's about taking that step back and trying to apply principles that one might have easily presented to clients and customers and consumers and apply them to your life. And that's something that can be difficult. And as far as what words of wisdom, I'm trying to come up with those all the time with my son. It's very difficult because his first response is that the world that I grew up in was so different that I can't possibly advise him about anything. He's a little precocious that way. But actually what I would say is that one can look at gaining experience that can be transferable in many spaces. It doesn't have to be so narrowly defined. And I hear a lot of high school students now worrying about what courses that they take now and making sure they have enough AP or honors and wanting to apply into a specific program. I still believe in a liberal arts education that doesn't have a major declared until after sophomore year, because that's a gift. That's a gift of time to explore things that you might not have been exposed to in high school or in your life growing up. And I wish I could go back knowing what I know now and explore, because there's so many interesting things. I mean, I always am astounded at how things keep emerging. And I had mentioned the urban humanism, but there's so many interesting spaces around the new materialisms, and just a lot of very kind of philosophical thinking about design not being human-centered. Perhaps we have to look past the anthropomorphic application of a certain type of design that was servicing corporate success and think differently about what it might mean for a larger ecosystem approach. And that's something that it's nothing you can talk to a high school student about, but I do think that all of the doom and gloom around AI taking jobs, I think there's plenty of jobs to be done. And we have to train the AI. We have to understand large language models. We have to understand language in how we even communicate with one another, because as we can see in the news, human beings are terrible at finding common ground. And I would, if I would do it over, I would actually take a gap year, but a lot of people are afraid to step off the train. And so how to equip people to be productive about taking a different path and maybe not seeing it as, oh, you have to do something by a certain age or you're somehow obsolete. That's just not true. You don't have to do college right after high school. You could wait, but again, I think the industry is geared toward this large machine that just keeps turning.
Yeah, I actually agree with everything you said. And I think that a lot of times it's the parents that put this pressure on the kids, right? But, and, you know, and I've watched, I have two sons and I have a stepson, and watching them kind of navigate their 20s has been really interesting. And some, you know, my stepson is the older than my sons, and he got into a job and he was extremely successful, got promoted, got a big raise and everything, but he was miserable. He absolutely hated it. So he quit. And, you know, his parents, my husband and his mom, were like, you know, what have you done? But it really, you know, it's like, maybe think of that first job as just, I'm just learning how to be an employee in an environment. I may not be in the right environment. I don't know yet. I just want to try, you know. And so that type of approach, and it's a little bit of a micro step. Like right now, what do I need to do to, what's the first set of skills that I should try to get accustomed to? And then, you know, the more you learn about the workplace and your strengths and weaknesses as a worker, then, you know, you can decide which direction to go next.
That's
And
really good advice, Amy. And I think that youth today often have very large expectations. I had never had conversations with my peers in high school about how much money I wanted to make by the time I was 30. That just didn't occur to me. Maybe I was naive, but it's incredible that I hear these snippets of conversation around very specific, very narrowly defined views of what success looks like. And I do think there's value to go out there, to work in hospitality, to have to serve others, to volunteer, to work at a retail store. There are so many dimensions that are applicable to larger scale endeavors. And you do have to learn how to be an employee, and maybe you find you can't be an employee, in which case it's good that you learned that early. And then you can figure out then what is it?
Maybe then now I need to be an entrepreneur because I know I'm never going to be a good employee or whatever. Yeah. And I don't even think that applies just to people in their, you know, graduating from high school or college. It's really anyone in the early stages of a career or any stage, because, you know, just because you're in the latter third of a career doesn't mean you can't do something completely different. I knew a fellow that I worked with at Treasury who was an attorney and did very, very well as an attorney in the government. Then he went and became a partner at a law firm, did very well at that, but he had always wanted to be a therapist. So he paid off his house with his partner earnings for a few years. And then he went back to school and got a master's in social work or something. I forget what it was, counseling. And he became a therapist. And he was, you know, in his 60s. So like, it really doesn't matter what stage you are in terms of what you need to learn about the next step.
There's another question besides actually two comments of people saying they would love a gap year. So, you know, Julie and
I think they call it a sabbatical. They call it a sabbatical when you're our age, but that works too.
Okay, absolutely. But Veronica Carrera asks, through this tough and challenging transition, where you may have felt that your foundation was shaken, what have you learned about yourself?
I've learned, that is a great question. And I think I'm still learning, but I learned that I have a lot of things that I can contribute, but I don't necessarily know how to describe them so that it's understood by others. And I also feel that I am very resilient. And that comes from being the child of immigrants. I feel that I will figure out something. And I learned that from my parents, you know, you can make a lot out of a little. And so that's something that I also appreciate, is that I'm not, although I do miss, of course, flying business class and going to meet colleagues in other parts of the world. It's not going to happen right now, but that's okay, because there's so much happening in my own backyard. And that is, I think, a good lesson, is that it's not a demotion. It's that we are discovering how to be more in control of the choices that we're able to make.
Yeah, I agree. One thing I would add to that is that that there's a really important role to play in the visualization of what the future looks like. And I think I've gotten, my husband says, you know, you visualize what you wanted and then it happens. And you know, the process of going through the transition and the thinking and the understanding of yourself and your experiences and judgment and skills and value can help you visualize what that future looks like. And being able to do that is something I think I didn't necessarily really think of before, because I had always just gone from job to job, and it wasn't like something I really had to think about that much. And so I think that's something that I have realized about myself, is my ability to visualize what I want.
Very good. And there's a quote from Gitanjali. Thank you. Comparison is the thief of joy, and what society has defined as the idea of success sets us up not for failure, but frustration. So interesting.
Very true. Very true. And it's hard, right? Especially when we're always looking at comparing ourselves on LinkedIn or looking at other social media channels, and feeling like either you're missing out or that you have to say something or have a comment, and you don't always have to. So I've been very deliberate about things that I post on LinkedIn, because I can't always have that high energy to promote myself. It's more about calling out things that I find important or interesting, and I think that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also you can compare yourself to the job you had, and you've talked a little bit about that. I mean, that comparison can be a source of frustration and you know, source of ways to feel bad about yourself now, which, you know, is an easy trap to fall into.
That's very true. And I know one of the things regarding job applications or job descriptions that always comes through is that I've heard that men will typically read the criteria and the requirements and say, oh, I can do that. And women will often say, oh, I haven't done X or Y. I don't think I can do that. And so I have had my moments of doubt along the way. And I've occasionally asked some of my close friends, sent them a description and asked, I think I can do this. What do you think? and that, I hope that they're able to give me candid feedback, because the more time goes by, the more I forget how much I had to do. And the fog of memory, you know, all of those
Yeah.
many notebooks that I still have stacked in boxes or on my shelves. There was some incredible stuff that I did with an incredible team. And to just remember that and to feel confident that no job description can completely convey the reality. And in fact, it often is quite different. And so what is it that one needs to do to have the conversation to then ascertain, is that a good fit? Because for me, it has to be a good cultural fit. I don't want to work someplace where I don't feel comfortable or I don't feel that there are shared values.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Diane, I think there was another question that popped up.
Oh, let's see here. Actually, yeah, Svenja just saying she loves Sami's LinkedIn post, and I apologize if I incorrectly. She said they cut through the noise, very thoughtful and thought-provoking. So, yes. So I don't know if there are any other questions that I've missed.
Diane has a question, Diane.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you. First of all, I apologize that I look as if I've just come in from the garden, because I have. It stopped raining here in the UK for the first time since the beginning of the year. So I'm literally in my gardening clothes. I apologise. I'm not presenting as a Quorum Initiative member. But anyway, I just wanted to say thank you so much for an absolutely wonderful session. And it made me realise, as she was speaking, this is 15 years this month since the same thing happened to me. And I've made loads of notes from what you were talking about. And I found the most difficult thing was the lack of control, that you're used to making your own decisions, and this decision has not been made by you. So you haven't had time to prepare and plan. And what I found was that everything you said was right. You have to concentrate on what you know you can do. You look up your old contacts, work out what your skills are. Would you say that it's a good idea to start having more mentors and the board you can't afford to, as in a recent Quorum event, because I wished I'd had more mentors when I was working in my last full-time job, because what you desperately need, and Amy touched on this, is advice on how to present yourself. What are your skills? What have you got to offer? And what do you want?
I love the fact that there are many people who embrace mentorship. And I think that's such an important dynamic. And it can be a friend, it can be a colleague, it can be somebody that you just have come to know but never worked with. But I find it very valuable, and hopefully I'm able to give back something as well to whomever I'm speaking to or others who need help. But that connection is valuable if you can find people who are able to tell you the truth. Because I think we live in a society where there's just a lot of exaggeration, and everyone gets a trophy. And so if one can have a safe space to have those difficult or candid conversations, and one also has the ability to say, you know what, I hear what you're saying, but I don't completely agree. So take what you want. And that's the beauty of it, is because you might find that over time, your perspective will change as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a dear friend who is always berating me for selling myself short. She thinks I should not be applying to jobs that she feels are below my level. But I've asked her again and again, well, what does that actually mean? I think that one has assumptions about level, and those are artificial assumptions, because what I'm looking for is a space to contribute meaningfully in the right kind of community or culture. And so it doesn't matter if it's a VP or if it's a research associate. But again, it's hard to drop the baggage of valuing some of those titles and credentials.
Yes.
Yeah, Somi, you talked about you talked about defining your success for yourself and not based on what your last title was, and I think that's so important. The other thing I would mention is the idea of a personal board of advisors that may be different depending on the situation that you're going through in your phase of life. A board of advisors on how to deal with a parent with dementia, a board of advisors on how to deal with career transition. And if you can find a group of people, as Somi mentioned, who can be honest with you and that know you well, and know that space well, or some combination thereof, and then you can consult with those people, that can be extremely helpful for any kind of a transition period. Diane, are we at our time for passing back to Meg?
Yes, we are. But before Meg thank you both so much. This has just been an extraordinary session. So yeah, all the clapping. So I will hand this over to Meg.
Yeah, thank you. Amy and Somi, thank you so much for being so candid and being so willing to share, your own experiences around what's such a difficult occurrence, but happens frankly, really pretty much to all of us at some point on the journey, and sometimes multiple times. It's just the nature of the beast, you know, in terms of what happens out there in this kind of crazy world. There was so much content that I was going to recap, but my list is like at 20. So I think rather than do that, I'll share back the things that I had heard that were super valuable to me. There's two things that I think both Amy and Sami share, which is amazing. They both have incredible resilience, and it's something I've always admired in both of you in terms of how you present yourselves to the world. You also both have really interesting kind of exploratory minds and curiosity of spirit. And I think those are things, if we can hold on to that and embrace that throughout our whole lives, it will serve us forever and ever and ever and ever, you know? And so those are traits that I think are just amazing superpowers that both of you have. So I just wanted to call that out. And I love also that actually both of you are on two different paths at the moment, which just explains how there is no one way that makes this, you know, there's no one answer here. And so I think that's always very hard, because we love it when everything kind of fits together. And Sami, you said something about, you know, sort of imagining unstructuring the structured almost at one point, and I thought that's so fascinating because it's so true, you know. So anyway, really powerful stuff. I'll share some of my notes, and maybe Diane, you can share yours, and anyone else that wants to throw some comments in too, so we can pass it around. Thank you. We would give you this massive round of applause and big hugs for sharing. We really appreciate your time. The only thing I wanted to mention is Quorum has a big retreat coming up. I think we're 10 days away, about maybe even less, Diane, a little over a week. Starts on the 17th, the night of the 17th, and ends midday on the 19th of May. And there's still space. So if any of you at last minute want to jump on and be a part of it, we would love to have you. It's got a terrific programming, and it's an opportunity for all of us to kind of get away from our day-to-day, connect with each other, and you know, reflect on where we're at and where we want to be. So I think that's exciting. And I also wanted to mention that we actually have locked down a date. And now I say that out loud, Diane, and I've promptly forgotten the date. It's for our house forum in New York, which is in November
15th.
15th. I couldn't remember if it was 15th or 17th. I was like, I'm going to announce it. It's going to be wrong. So we'll be doing a dinner the night before, and then a full day session in New York. So the 14th, night of the 14th, and the day of the 15th. So if you can mark your calendars for that. And Diane's going to be in touch, because we have tons of great programming coming up as well. So stay tuned for that. And it's so great to see all of your fabulous faces, and look forward to staying connected. And thanks for everybody taking time out of their busy days to be here together. It was such a powerful discussion, so I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I have two more quick things, and my apologies.
Sorry.
Our email was down for 5 days. It was a bit of a nightmare. So if you sent me anything in the past 5 days, please resend, because it was lost. And if you're not already part of our community platform, please join that. It's a fabulous way for all Quorum members to interact. So with that, thank you so much again, Sami and Amy, and I hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you, everybody.